experience was pickling and canning. And canning, we were okay with as long as it wasn't more than about 2 or 3 months. But after that, things got iffy, and there was a time or two where you're just not sure if you canned it right. And so we would get really scared after about 2 3 months and throw everything that was left over out out of fear more than anything. And I know there's people who can and leave it canned for up to 2 years, but I don't know how to deal with that
Yeah, well,
mentally.
you can buy that kind of canned chicken.
Pickling,
Like it's like tuna, right? Like it's the exact same
mm,
consistency as tuna, but like people make chicken salad sandwiches with it all the time, and like
yeah,
so they're
basically, when you can the meat, you're basically cooking the meat almost all the way, and then when you actually do the canning process, where you're doing the finishing boiling and boiling the air out and sealing your jars, it finishes cooking it. So it's in a liquid sauce that if any air gets in there at all, it will start to
yeah, I totally know what you
rot
mean.
on top.
Yeah, you want it to be
And
anaerobic with meat
you
usually.
know, yeah, you pressure can it so that you make sure that you've got your vacuum seal. But dude, the quality of even your seals you buy nowadays is so inconsistent that you may do everything perfect and it still come unsealed on you. So, and even the tiny pinhole where you still got enough vacuum that it pops a little bit when you take the top off, could still have gotten enough in air in there to cause some of it to go bad. Because I know there's a few times that it didn't taste bad, but boy, afterwards, we had some results that indicated it wasn't good.
Right, yeah. Yeah, that's
And
enough said there.
pickling was fine. Pickling was fine with stuff that we used as sandwich meats. But see, we didn't raise beef, and that's about the only thing we really like the taste of that's pickled. So that was another thing. And as far as other food preparation methods, we really never explored beyond those because by that point we were settled on the refrigeration, and I was bound to determine if I set up a whole solar system just to keep a freezer going, that's what I was going to do. And that's kind of where I'm at now. I'm setting up basically one to keep a freezer going and one to keep a refrigerator going with
That's
enough extra power to hopefully watch
yeah,
clothes
that's
a time or two a week and keep a 12-volt water and 12-volt propane.
I was actually going to ask you a question about that. I wanted to ask about the power requirements, the minimum power requirements you would need to generate from a solar system to power, say, like, those freezers people used to have in their basements in the 80s, where it's like a huge freezer. You open it
Mm-hmm.
up from the top, and it's always in the basement or in the garage or something like that. And those, like, one of those could keep a family alive, in my opinion, if it was fully stocked with meat. It You could probably go close to a year on that, like a family of four, it, probably longer even. So how much power requirements do those actually take?
And see, that's where I have spent the last 2 weeks looking through all different types of these things to do the calculations. Basically, what I found out is a 2 to 3 cubic foot freezer is going to take somewhere between 6 and 900 watts of power. Now, you want to have at least 900 watts of continual supply during the daytime and enough power supply overnight that you keep it running until your power comes back up on your cells. So you
So
got
you're
to
gonna
have
need a
900
battery.
watt hours. Yes, you have to have batteries. As a matter of fact, from experience, you're going to need for. I'm basically building two 1500-watt systems, one for the shed and one for the camper. And on each one of those systems, I'm going to have 6 to 8 batteries, and I'm going to have um, 1500 watts of panels. I'm going to run run a 2,000 watt inverter, and with that 2,000 watt inverter, I will be able to run a energy efficient washer, um, a 3 cubic foot deep freeze, and possibly a power tool on occasion. Um, on the camper, the air conditioning system requires 600 watts. The microwave requires 1100 watts, and I've got a small microwave. Most are 13 to 1500 watts. Remember, your microwave doesn't stay on all the time. It only stays on for a few minutes at a time. Um,
I would also say that
Adding up most of our little equipment.
a microwave off grid is totally a luxury, by the way. But yeah, if you can do it and you
Hmm.
got a microwave, like Jesus, you're not. It's not like you're getting. It's here's the thing that's awesome about the way you're doing it, in my opinion, is like you're getting off grid, but you're taking pieces of the grid with you, but they're just unplugged, and you're like, yeah, this piece was good. I'll take that.
Right. And see, we really don't like to use the microwave, but we are so conditioned to things in our society that there are times where reheating is quite necessary, you know, to get things done.
Yeah, well,
But
you don't want
yeah,
to
that's
have to.
another thing. Whereas
You don't
we
want to
can
have to know
adjust
every
that
time
at.
you're hungry 4 hours in advance when you can start a fire in the rain.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. And see, that's the thing. We are going to go completely to wood heat and wood heat for our water as well. And I've just looking at a wood stove this week. I just haven't committed to one yet. Um, I had to rebuild the floors in my camper first so that I can have a place to put the wood stove. But we just finished the patching on those this week. We're going to do the double layer decking next week, and we'll be ready to put a stove in. And then I've got the stuff together to extend that to where I can do an outdoor, take some of that fire into an outdoor pit, and then run it up through a flue that's going to heat the water heater. But that's going to be a project in the future once we figure out how we're going to do the decking.
Of course, yeah.
Because
Yeah, you got to
you
have
got
your
to know where you're
priorities.
going to put
Yeah.
the
To the
thing.
freezer part, the have you ever experimented with the idea of
Hmm.
burying the freezer in the ground? Like either building either root cellar or something like that and putting the freezer in there, or actually just physically burying the freezer, like, I don't know, 3 feet into the ground.
It then heats up your root cellar and messes up your vegetables in your root cellar.
Right.
So, no, I mean, yes, I can understand the theory of it, but no, I've never even considered it. But yeah, I mean, that would be extra insulation, basically, that would keep the things on the inside needing to turn on and off, less frequent. Yeah, that's if we started this in 2005, and we moved into a mostly Amish and Mennonite community. There's a lot of Messianics out here. Several of my friends never did get on the grid. They are still completely off grid. Several of them have children who were born without social security numbers. I have pretty much watched every homestead video ever put on YouTube tried by somebody.
Awesome.
And to be honest with you, what works for one family doesn't always work for another family, because temperaments for what one person's willing to deal with and do is not always the case for what another person's willing to do. And I've watched where, and you're talking about planning for your future, you've got to consider what your plan is going to be, so that when you communicate with the person who's going to be your possible future spouse, you can get a person who correlates with what you see as your vision, because otherwise you're going to have to start compromising that vision in order to accommodate love, and you're going to have to change all your plans midstream. Or you can you understand where I'm going with this?
I do.
We made the decision to head off grid, but once we got off grid, the discomforts weren't quite what my wife was expecting. So we had to then continually adjust our plan throughout the period of time. Now, I happen to be in a situation where my wife got sick and passed away at the beginning of this year, so I no longer have that as a stress or concession. And in my I haven't, but I have several friends who have put them in the root cellars. But since everything was already in a different state when I got here, I had to work from where I'm at. I was sick. I'm disabled now, so I can't go completely with power. Even though we did for 3 weeks, we lived in a tent. But during that period of time, I ended up with the shakes twice. I caught chill twice, and that was a very uncomfortable experience. And I knew I had to make sure I had four walls around me. So I had to start taking into consideration my condition where I'm at now, because my original intention was not to ever turn the power back on when I came up here. But my son's like, Dad, I'm not going to let you stay there until you get your power system in place without something going on for you there. So my son went down and turned the power back on. But now I've got all the pieces except for some connectors. And as soon as they're in place, I'm going to have this thing hooked up to where once again that power, and it's a pay as you go power plan here. So all I got to do is call down there and say, I got $50 left, but I'm not going to use it. Just hold on to it in case I need it. And if something does happen to my system, I do have that umbilical or that lifeline until such time as the government says, you know what, your neighborhood's rebellious. We're going to cut your power off. Well, when they do that, then I have to make sure I'm ready to go without that umbilical cord, which is what my ultimate goal is to be where I don't have to even rely on an umbilical cord.
Well,
Um,
let's go into that
I,
a little bit. Like, how are you? Because I know you do have running water on your property, um, and we have talked briefly. I think it probably was in Discord chats about the possibility of you doing your own hydro.
right. There are three springs on my property. There's one on my neighbor's property that runs onto my property. One's in the front of it, one's in the middle of it, and one's on the creek bed in the back of it, which is also a running creek. Now, my original plan was as close as those springs are to dig one out and put a spring box in. But the condition of our environment has gotten to where that water is no longer safe for a person to drink just like it is. So I've been doing a lot of studying on different water systems that were developed for third world countries for these villages that had poor water, but the whole village made their own water systems.
That video you sent me, the I think it was a couple weeks ago of that guy. There was a four like 5 gallon, or no, it was more than five. It was 50-gallon tanks.
No,
Uh,
that is the one we are building. I am one tank short of having everything. We have already located on our property the sand and the rock base that we need out of the creek bed. As soon as I have a four-wheeler, which is something I'm purchasing this next week or two, I will be able to transport the rock and the sand up here. I've also located a metal barrel for making the charcoal, because once you build this system, you only got to change the charcoal once every 2 to 3 years, and you can filter up to 6,000 gallons of water a day.
well,
Sand, rock, and charcoal, and four big barrels.
yeah, and I encourage people to check out how to make proper charcoal for one, because I didn't even know about this till Bryan turned me on to it. He sent me this video, and uh, it was how to make your own. You don't even need a pump; it's gravitationally fed, and you use rainwater to get the water, or you can rig it to use a stream or whatever you want. Um, Long story short, at the end of the
Right,
day, you get like just purified water. You're not using really any sort of technology, so to speak. I guess you could say you don't need a pump, and the amount of water you can get off is just incredible, and it's completely pure. You don't even have to boil it.
and the really cool thing is using the principles of nature. If you place those four tanks 3 feet above your highest spigot, you don't even have to have a pump in most cases. The gravity fed pressure of that water is enough to run your sinks and your showers and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So that's kind of the only thing holding me up, and I'm getting the materials for that part of it right now. Me and my brother are tearing down a marina for the wood and stuff. We're going to build water towers that have 250-gallon water tanks that are fed off the roof gutters, and then those are going to feed over and into the water barrels. And then the other technology I was going to tell you about is the ram pump, and it's using the back pressure from water to make a water pump in and of itself. And you can drop that down into one of the springs, and we're going to use it to feed the filter system. Now, with those two systems feeding the filter system, usually you put a cutoff valve or shutoff valve, but we're not going to do that. We're going to then loop it back so that it overflows on a continual basis. And we're going to use that water pressure to run a small hydro power plant so that we can generate somewhere around 250 watts of power just from the back pressure from the water. Then, with a couple small wind vanes, these cloudy days being in the central United States, when we get 3, 4 cloudy days in a row, I don't have to worry about having more than 6 or 8 batteries because I'll still be able to keep them trickle charge fed. Otherwise, 6 batteries is only good for 2 days unless I cut everything off except for the refrigerator. Then 6 batteries is basically good for 6 days. But if the sun doesn't come out in longer than 6 days, then my refrigerator goes dead. So I've got to have some type of alternate juice. And that's why we've been working with collecting hoverboard motors so that we can make wind turbines and hydro turbines. And we're trying to develop our system where we can use all the natural pressures so that we don't have to worry about having electric pumps if, even a 12-volt pump takes the battery power off. The more battery power you use every day, the more you have to replenish it. The more times you replenish it, the faster your batteries go bad. So those are all things you got to keep into mind. If we're talking about a collapse of an economy where there's no money to buy new batteries and nobody wants to trade batteries because it's the only thing keeping their houses and their vehicles running, you've got to minimize the use and the destruction to the battery that you have and just use and power what's absolutely necessary. If the economy crashed, the only thing I'd be running power on would strictly be a refrigerator and a freezer. Everything else would go back to hand and natural resources. And that's the reason why we're going to build water towers and that type of thing so that it's all up above and we can use natural pressure.
Yeah, and that's I mean, I'm pretty sure the ancient Greeks used to use the same technology with the aqueducts and all that kind of stuff too. Um, you just made me think of something that I think
Exactly.
is worth mentioning here, and that is it just totally left my brain. I can't believe that. That's amazing. What was it? Oh, there was something really, really cool. Oh, here it is. Yeah, I remember. Okay, so take the concept of a sail or a kite or a wing, okay? And now you construct some sort of you don't have to use like mega materials or anything like that, but basically it's like a funnel, and the funnel, all it does is collect wind, because let's say you live on a place where there's pretty much like a consistent wind direction. When it's windy, it's always blowing from one direction to the next, right? So you you build this sort of sail, uh, for lack of a better word, at this point in time. Think of it more like a sail, but it acting like a funnel. So it's funneling the wind like a wind tunnel. It's collecting a whole large amount of wind and blowing it into a small amount of area, and then you stick a smaller fan right at the point where that smaller, where the funnel is like draining into the bottle, except you think of the wind going into the fan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Is there? Do you think there'd be like any way of utilizing
Special.
that kind of thing?
That's a good idea. That's like a jet turbine wind system. Basically, you're creating you're using wind pressure to increase the pressure point when it hits the turbine, which would increase your speed, which would increase your power outage. Yeah, it's actually a cool idea.
And
One of the
here's
plans I'm
another
going to
idea
build
that
is a
would go on
vertical
top of
oven.
that though. Here's one more idea that would go on top of that because let's say okay, because what I basically just described here is what I like to call instead of a sail, it's like a harvester of wind, and so it harvests all like a parachute would work, but
Yeah,
there's a hole in the top of the
it's like
parachute.
a giant windsock.
Yeah. So you would
It's
have
like a
like a lot of
windsock.
those and then like very few amount of wind turbines and you could generate so much electricity that you could actually power a fan to blow fields on the other side of it. So it would be
That, that would be,
continuous.
see, that would be awesome for areas. That would be awesome for areas with low wind pressure because you would be taking the low wind and making it high enough to run a turbine where they normally wouldn't be able to use wind pressure.
Right.
Um, but for most turbines you build, you have to make sure you don't overproduce because when the wind gets going, it's variable speed, and where it may be producing like what you want around 12 to 24 volts at a normal spin day during a storm, it may run it up to 60 or 90 volts, and then you burn up your system. And
Right. So
that's why
you
you
could
have
have
charge controllers on your
yeah,
system.
you could have charge controllers exactly that would open and close
But
vents in the actual sail system, so that if the wind was too strong, it would just
oh,
open up vents and let some
yeah,
of it go through, just like a greenhouse would if you were too hot
yeah.
in a
Uh,
greenhouse.
and see, what you're saying is pretty much normally true. When we bought this land, one of the things we looked at was the percentage of time that wind was blowing, when it was blowing, and how hard it was blowing. Like we noticed every time it's cloudy here and a storm comes through, there's definitely wind. The wind always cut across the valley the same direction. We've had 3 tornadoes come within 1,000 feet of the house, and every one of them runs the same exact path because of the cut through the valley.
That's funny. We
Um,
had a tornado warning here
the
the other day. Yesterday night, 7 p.m. I got a message on my phone said tornado warning.
Oh wow, is that normal up that far?
I don't think so.
Do you all normally get tornadoes up here? Yeah, I don't think so either.
There's a
See, I've
place
lived in
called
Tornado
Barry.
Alley for a good portion of my life.
Yeah, there's a place called Barry. I guess it's still considered Southern Ontario. Because Ontario's huge. Ontario, most people don't realize Ontario's not just Toronto and Hamilton, and in Ottawa and all those kind of cities. It goes, it goes, it goes almost as far north to like Hudson's Bay and all that kind of stuff. As it goes, we're almost at Florida if you were to go the same direction south.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So most people just live right along that line.
Yeah.
Uh,
See, north, that far north, you normally get the driving straight line winds. Tornadic activity is more along that margin between your warm environment and your cold environment, and that's the reason why they have a tornado belt,
yeah,
and
you're
it's
right, man.
usually through the hilly areas.
I gotta tell you though, like
And
I've been in this
so
area my
you have
whole
a
life,
tornado warning up there.
and
That's kind of
there's
unheard
more tornadoes now than there was definitely even 5 years ago in this area.
of. Wow. Yeah, see, here's a cool one. 2 nights ago, my brother was up here staying in the tent, and 2 o'clock in the morning, I heard a boom, and I woke up and I thought I saw a flash of light, and then all of a sudden, every dog in the entire valley barked all at once. Now, if you're used to animals, you'll have one set off, and then you hear another one set off, and you can tell which direction the animal's running through the woods by which dog they're starting to bark. You can tell if it's a good animal or a bad animal by what type of barks they bark. But when they all go off at once, well, my brother and I are sitting there talking about it, and he's like, I didn't hear a boom. He says, I was already awake, and this is 2 o'clock in the morning. He says, I was already awake, sitting here on my air mattress when I just realized something was different, and all the dogs were barking. And then I got to looking around, and one of my containers had fallen off my shelf. So we must have had a small earthquake. And the boom of something falling off my shelf is what woke me up. and then that set all the dogs off. But I asked him, I said, "What about the flash? I thought I saw a flash." No, I didn't see any flash. Because at first I thought maybe it was a meteorite, but the more I got thinking about it, maybe it was just me opening my eyes was the flash because the boom had woke me up. But I've lived here. We moved in '05, and in all that time, I felt a total of two earthquakes on the Madrid Fault. And since I have been back, I have felt two, and I think that the night before last was the third one, and that's in 2 months. So, and I'm off the Madrid. Is that am I saying it right? New Madrid Fault. Yeah, the New Madrid Fault. I'm about 150 miles off of. So them to have an earthquake and for me to feel it around the 3 or 4, and there was indication that there's been several on the earthquake thing in the last few weeks, but we couldn't find the one for 2 o'clock the other night, so we're still not 100% unless
So, what do you think that
you have like
means? Like, I mean, like, what are your theories on as to like because usually if you think about like where like geographically, like you're not really that far away from me geographically. Like, if you're in Tennessee, that's I mean, we're kind of like closer to the middle of the continent than we are to the edge of the continent, and I mean, the growing season is similar. I mean, you guys are warmer than where I am, obviously, but it's not by much. It's only like maybe a month or two. I mean, what I heard Scotty saying the other day was that he has snow forecasted for today, and right now where I am, it's a beautiful day, autumn. You could walk out with a light jacket, no problem. If you were jogging, you wouldn't even want to wear a jacket, like or riding a bike or whatever. It's not that cold here, and so like Kansas,
there's
relative to where I am, is really, really like a lot further south. So it doesn't. There's some things going on with the weather here, folks. That's all I'm saying. Um, Weather patterns are changing, or the jet streams like wavelength, that waveform that you see that goes over the Earth, it's shifting over or a little bit, or something's going on.
according to the scriptures, at some point in time, it's going to quit complete moving completely. Um, all the winds are going to stop. So that's one thing. If you're going to be relying on just strictly wind power, that's going to be an issue when that time comes. Um, but and here's where I'm going to go off on the woo side or the kooky side, or a lot of people will believe this as well. Spiritual world and physical world are directly tied together. And as morality decreases, a spiritual weight increases. And as morality decreases, the way we treat nature becomes very negative. We destroy instead of build her up. Nature will only take that for so long. It says nature will only take that for so long. It will only allow us to destroy her so much. And then the spiritual side is going to streak back and it's going to correct it by causing catastrophe. So, and this is where you get into the woo part. According to my belief, if mankind was able to change its morality, all of these asteroids or whatever other planetary bodies will be directed away from us because the spiritual force field would increase. But the more that we continue to destroy each other in our environment and add to that weight and break down that spiritual shield, we become attractant to those foreign or heavenly bodies. And as those heavenly bodies are attracted to the earth, it causes earth changes or impregnation or a birth cycle. And what we are seeing is that birth cycle, and it increases and gets heavier and more. And if you look at the difference in the earthquakes from 1 year ago to today, we are tenfold greater and almost 100-fold greater in strength on a regular basis. 1 year from Now, if that increases, they're going to be 1,000-fold stronger. It's a magnification process and an even more frequent basis. According to the texts, as the evil system solidifies itself and enslaves mankind under its one world system, and it begins to mock the creator or the creation and begin to completely rape not only the earth but space as well, the spiritual side is going to turn and bring those bodies in as correction, and it will get to a point where eventually there won't be enough good people to turn that around. And I believe that's where these evil people are going to. They're trying to destroy as many good people as they can so that that force or that shield will break. And then you go into the side of why do they want to do that? Well, according to the text, their children are trapped in a place between the spirit world and the flesh world, and their children are not allowed to have either bodies and be satisfied and are therefore in torment. And their object is to free their children from that world. So they want the utter destruction of this matrix as it stands as a physical world. So they are doing every they can to demoralize so that the spiritual will have to correct and will have to destroy what is demoralizing the spiritual realm.
Right, and I mean, even to the point where you're saying that the new souls born into this system aren't even gonna realize that they have a spiritual choice at all. They won't even have an acknowledgement of their own.
Think about the difference. Okay, think about the difference from when you and I were born to when your possible children are going to be born. And I look at it as to when my children were born. Okay, I took my kids out of society so they could have some of the same freedoms I had as a child to make moral choices. Now, all moral choices are legislated. You no longer, and here's where we get into a issue of the legal. Who has the legal authority or right to reign over
Yep.
any realm, whether it be spiritual or physical? Who has the manifested power? And
Yeah,
I'm
you're right.
trying not to get too
No, I
far
know
out on
exactly
that.
what you're talking.
Um,
No, I know exactly what you're talking about here because the idea
so,
of giving
so
your child a
my
birth certificate in itself, to me, has become a completely different concept in the last maybe
I,
8 9 months.
okay, let's think about these new COVID rules. Okay, I homeschooled my first three children with complete freedom. I was able to teach them anything they want to. Now, as the public system is being put into a homeschool system, they are putting more restrictions on me. My daughter has to have access to the internet as a homeschool child, or else it's considered abuse and they could take my daughter away from me. So, you know,
Wow.
it's well, it's all being legislated. So
Oh
I have a
my
satellite
goodness.
internet here,
Are you
but
serious?
I have to make the choice of whether or not I'm going to use it.
You're saying, hold on.
Yes,
You're saying that you could have your child taken away from you if you don't provide them with the internet?
correct.
Oh my.
Because now, due to the homeschool or due to the COVID ruling for the kids that have to stay at home, have to have access to the internet, that has to apply to all homeschoolers.
I am going to take this part out of this
I
whole
have
conversation
to
and make a
have the
totally
internet.
different video on it because holy fucking shit. I can't believe that's how far they've actually gone.
They have been trying for years. They have been trying for years to figure out how to control the homeschoolers. Well, now that she has to have the connection, the only next logical step is that her daily work is going to have to be registered as opposed to her system or systematic work. In other words, I personally, because of the way I chose to homeschool, I hired an umbrella school. I report all of her time and her grades to a school who then keeps the records in a government file that enables her to get a regular diploma. My first three children graduated with a regular diploma with a regular SAT score, even though they were homeschooled. They homeschooled to mastery, which means everything they did had to be 100%. So they, of course, graduate what would be basically a valedictorian level. So any education thing that they've taken since then, they always go in at a higher level than the people that are in there because they had to master all the skills before they went to the next one. Now, because it has to be daily, or they're wanting us to join their system of daily having to report what she does, it means that if she doesn't master, she still has to report and go to the next segment before she masters the segment she's on. So basically, they're making her go to a lesser education system. They're controlling my homeschool education system if they get what they want to do into place.
That's
Because
super, like,
now
totally.
it's about what she does every day.
Okay, this is what's really cool is because there is at least one channel that I watch regularly, and I'm not gonna name him here, but he he does he's a proponent of homeschooling, and it's exactly for these sort of same. I mean, I guess if you don't see the reason here at this point, if you're listening to this still, and I appreciate it, um, if you don't see what we're talking about here as far as homeschooling goes and how it's trying to be governed, government or whatever you want to call it, like this is like you should be allowed to teach your kids whatever you want, in my opinion, as long as it's not gonna harm other kids. That's, I mean, to boil it down, if you're teaching your kids something that's harmless, maybe it's not proven, maybe it's a belief, maybe it's an opinion. That's up to you as a parent, okay? That's where the onus falls on the parent. Um, if you want to teach your kids an opinion that's not proven, or whatever you want to call it, then that's on you, that as the parent. To take that parent's right away is, in my opinion, completely insane. And if we allow this to happen, I think that's consent. And when they have consent, that's when they just keep doing more stuff, like forcing you to wear a mask when you just
Oh, I'll
want
be
to buy a
absolutely
bag of
honest with
milk.
you. Well, see, here's the thing, though. Most homeschoolers have already consented because we've already agreed that our children have to have the same exact set of education as the public school kids do to start off with. If you look at the way education truly should be, and this is where we kind of varied a little bit on how we taught our kids, each person not only learns different, they process different, and they have different skill sets. So you develop your skill sets that you're good at, and you improve or sharpen the ones that you're not good at. You don't try to develop the ones you're not good at to be your primary skills. You develop them as secondary skills to enhance or help your primary skills. We should be teaching people how by the time they're 18, 19 years old, they should be able to take what they want to do in life and progress in that direction. Not have to have 18 years of this generalized knowledge of nothing, of a system, of how to fit within a system, how to be propagandized into believing that this system is the only way that we can live, that we have to rely on this system for our safety, that we have to rely on this system for our economy. But what I did, and I'm not saying this is for everybody, I instead taught my kids the system, but showed them how the system was contrary to what a righteous system was. I taught them what the system should look like, how to make it so that their personal behavior and their life ex- was a projection of what the systems should be while they existed in the system that was. And it, it enabled them to have the broad view of everything and yet still specialize in what they want to do. They didn't go to college and waste 4 years in college doing another part of the system. My one son took the skills that he knew and liked, and he applied them to his building. And by the time he was 21, he was managing a company. Well, he was managing departments within another man's company. He builds manufactured homes, and he manages all the people building the different sections of the manufactured home. But he took his math, he took his crafts and his history of what the different furniture stuff was and how it's progressed, and he used all that stuff to apply to how he built and his conscientious type of. My other son then he directed it into his writing and into his inventing, and my daughter she directed it into helping others in the way of she became a beautician. She focused more on external looks and stuff, but her skills were with her hands. Her skills were with knowing how to make people look good. So that's, she applied it to what she was good at. By 21, she's managing a beauty salon. So, we should focus our kids in the directions of their skills. Now, I have a 13-year-old who's coming up. She's developing what she wants to do. So, as she's going through the different subjects, we discuss the strengths and weaknesses that she likes and doesn't like and how they apply to different jobs that she may or may not want to do. She just helped us for 2 days working on a roof, and she stopped in the middle of it and she said, "Dad, I'm going to find a desk job." I said, "Okay." She goes, "I'm whooped." I said, "Yeah, I understand." So, we discussed how, okay, now as you do more of this with me over time, you may develop a strength that you didn't know you had in this area.
Well,
However,
let me
you know
stop you
that
here.
this is something you don't want to spend your everyday doing. So, okay.
Let me stop you
But,
here
let me
and
finish the
ask.
one statement.
Wait. Hold on. There's one thing
Okay.
that I want to just point out here, and that is in regards to homeschooling. Okay, who would not be more of an empathic teacher? Okay, to recognize whether the child recognizes it or not, because they might be trying to perform to a certain standard that you might not be cognizant that you're projecting. So, th- who's going to be better qualified to see what your child is good at or not good at or takes an interest in or doesn't take an interest in than your own parents?
I'm going to answer from experience. 90% of cases, that is true. But there are some cases where the parents are not aptituded in that direction. And as a community, we've learned to help each other out in areas that we're not aptituded in, because I live amongst a lot of other homeschool type groups. I can use resources among other friends. But there are people who are not aptituded to teach at all. However, we have found they're just the ones you want to send your kids with to go show how to pluck the weeds out of the garden, or which bugs to kill and which ones to leave and that kind of stuff. So, it's what what is the importance of an education? You know, what does it need to do? And this is where the finish of my statement. So I turned to my daughter and I said, okay, so now you know that you need to focus on the homeschooling more when you're not doing the work so that you can get to the point of a desk job, because desk jobs have requirements that are in place because of the system. And how much of that system are you going to want to enjoy? Of course, that's my point to her all the time, is trying to help her see that hopefully one day she can live outside of that system as well. But at the same time, everything is geared to impress upon our children they have to obey that system more closely. Reason why you see parents out in public with little kids with masks on, and the parents are walking around with one around their chin. You know, I mean, it's a double standard that we teach our children already. So, you know, I mean, how can we not but have more conflict if we can't even decide within our own families what's right and wrong for ourselves?
Yeah, that's what I was getting at is like, but in my opinion, that's one of the arguments that homeschoolers have against the established argument for, well, how can you be smart enough to homeschool your own kids, kind of thing, where it's like, well, I went through the schooling system, so why wouldn't you think I wouldn't be qualified to homeschool if I went through the same schooling system as you did? Or like, especially if you're in like public school, like
And
I mean, I will admit there's a lot of other
in most
schooling
cases, that's
systems out
absolutely
there,
true.
right? So like there's like the Catholic school system, the public school system, there's like the Montessori's, there's all kinds. I mean, even in Ontario, we have like all Muslim schools, and they fought for ages and ages and ages to have the right to have an all Muslim school or an all black school or an all whatever
Mm.
race you want to or religion you want to put. It's all that school. And so there's criteria to get into those schools. So if we're allowed to have those criteria to get into those schools, then why? How come it's? I mean, it, to me, I mean, my, in this whole quarantine thing, I have a 14-year-old son. I would say he's probably learned more in the last 2 years, including quarantine, outside of school than he has inside of school. That he can take and learn and teach somebody, and it was going to be still as useful as when he learned it. Whereas if you think about, like, if you go to tech school, that technology in 20 years, that's gone. So that education is useless. It's redundant. But if you learn certain things can't be redundant. Like I mean, really, really, really rudimentary here is like learning how to start a fire, or like, I mean, learning the how to,
Mm.
like how to grow things in the ground and learning like what the soil does, how that all works. It's very complicated, but at the same time, it can be simplified, and it can be, and that's why I think they have all of these like legends and totems and all that kind of stuff, is to simplify that kind of concept, where it's like the most important information can be like taught from parents, because parents will know, especially if they have more than one kid. You know what? This kid's more sort of prone to like hands-on stuff, and this kid's more prone to like abstract thinking. So maybe one kid goes down an avenue of being in like construction or electronics or something they do with their hands, whereas the other kid might go into a field where they're giving advice to people, like some sort of a psychologist or therapist or something like that. Um, who's better qualified to notice these differences between their children than a parent?
So that's what my kids did. That's what my kids did. I've got one that went the direction. He likes working with his hands. He went the direction of the construction, and everything he learned, he did it to apply toward doing building and improving things that he builds. My other son, he's way more artistic and intuitive, but in a kind of airhead way. But he became a ghostwriter. He's actually got 3 books that he wrote that are published that are actually on a bestseller list. And so he was basically the editor and brain guy behind this dude's books. And he is soon to take a full-time salary from this guy and continue to work doing his books. And it's going to be more than I ever made a year in my life. So 26 years old, he's going to do better than his dad did eventually. But he
Yeah,
geared everything that he learned toward that.
we
But
call that
the
evolution.
dirty little secret of homeschooling, the dirty little secret of homeschooling is basically you've got to teach your kids to read, write, and arithmetic. Once you teach them to count, add, subtract, and divide and multiply, once you teach them the letters and how they sound and look, from there the child begins to educate themselves
Yeah, you can teach a
because
bird how to
everything you
count.
give them for educational material, everything you give them for educational material is coming from another person. So each one of those people actually become your child's teacher. The parent isn't really the teacher any longer. They are facilitating another teacher. Really, in homeschooling, the only thing you're doing is teaching your kids the basics. Beyond that, you're just monitoring them learning from many other people. Now, according to the scripture, in a multitude of advisors is wisdom found. When we relegate a child to one set of education, we are giving them basically one advisor. We're forming them into a system. We're making them a pliable slave by giving them multiple teachers because none of us write our own education. I mean, be honest. I mean, we buy education materials.
You know what?
So
Even when I was in school,
I shouldn't
I
say
had a
none of
lot
us.
of
There are a
older
few that
people.
do write
And
education.
no, I had a lot of older people even when I was in school, even like early high school. I used to hang out with a lot of my basically they were my parents' friends. And so they were all like at least 20, 30 years older than me, and they would say, "Don't worry, man. Anything you learn in school, it's completely useless once you get out of school." and and now I look back on that, they're telling me
Well,
the same thing, and I'm telling my kid the same thing. But on when I'm telling my kid the same thing, it's like on a scale that's like times 10. like like you could have been out of school after grade 3 and been okay.
my my kid my kids look at their dad's life and have the best example. In order to please my dad, I have a double well, I have a psychology and business degree with a associate in biblical counsel. Um, but I was in the middle of an internship and realized one, I was as messed up as the people who were coming looking for advice, and so were all the rest of the advisors with me. Two, I liked their medication as much as they did. And three, most of those people just wanted somebody to tell them what to do. They wanted somebody reliable to be codependent on, and I was already a codependent, so that wasn't going to work. So I loved building. I loved puzzling. I loved all that type of stuff with my hands, the art. And I was putting myself through school doing the maintenance, doing the electronics. And shoot, I dropped out of internship and basically went into full time maintenance. I was running my own company by the time I was 26 years old. And my kids came along with a dad who was running his own company for the most part. I did at different times take jobs when economies had different issues and also took partnerships with people. And so everything that I built my life and built everything they were raised with was on a foundation of knowledge from that, but I could have done the same job and started it 6 years earlier, basically, and been just as far and accomplished just as much in those fields. Now I'm disabled and injured, and I can no longer do those fields unless I get a lot of reconstructive surgery. And this doesn't seem a good time to do that anyway. Um, I've actually fallen back onto some of that educational stuff and used it in my different business dealings and side jobs and different stuff like that. But I could never actually become an actual counselor or psychologist or run human resources department or any of that type of thing even now because the life lessons I've gone through have shown me the disconnect that psychology is. and psychology is basically a form of magic. It's trying to manipulate and propagandize people,
And
and
yeah, you know
it's
what? You're totally right there because this is actually tying into the whole, at least theme I want to try to have with this series. Because I believe at this point right now we have over 5 hours of conversation, and I want to do this in kind of like maybe a trilogy. But this is the like I mean this is one of the main key reasons why I, at least in my opinion, why you would be getting off grid in the first place is because of the it's because of the it seems like people are just willing to let their kids go to school to learn. I mean, like, okay, somebody living in the prairies and somebody living in the Rocky Mountains in grade 5, let's say they're learning about what do you call it, home ec, where they teach you how to cook, right? So they teach all these kids in the same
mm-hmm,
country how to cook with the same ingredients, and that's cool and that's
mm,
good, and it's not, completely useless. But if you're living in the Rocky Mountains and then if you're living in the prairies, you don't get the same ingredients. And I feel like they're missing out on a lot of the intricacies of uh, knowing your local, uh, like the education you receive in one part of the world should be the same as the education you receive in another part of the world. And cooking and food resources, that's just one small example of it. But you can see how that concept would like translate over into, you know, what. Why is it that
yeah.
my dad used to
And,
always
and
laugh.
when we were and when we were children, when we were children, we had different educational systems in different parts of the country. And it wasn't until the 70s that they started the whole education um, drive where they wanted to standardize the entire education system across the nation, that we develop this new kind of one mindset. And it has to be that way if you're going to create one global village, which is their ultimate goal.
Well, here's what I was
um,
getting at, though. Like
you have to create
when I
a
used to
group
have
of people
problems,
reliant on the same resources.
when I used to have problems with math, my father would try to explain math in a totally different way, and he was taught math in the UK. I was born in the UK but moved here before I went to school, and so I was born UK but brought up in Western or North American education system, and I would have problems with math, and he would be like, "Well, no wonder you're having problems. Don't think of it that way. Think about it this way." And I know I'm being very vague here, but he would just explain things in a way where it would be like easier for me to understand what they were trying to teach me. And so it like I don't know who to blame here. Is it the teaching mechanism that I'm supposed to blame here, or is it the way that I was being taught? So not necessarily the mechanism, but like it's just a cookie cutter uh, distribution system that doesn't take into consideration the different ways of applying the same knowledge to different kinds of people and how they learn differently. And that goes back again to what I say before, is who's better to know what a child is capable of learning better than their parents.
And who's going to be more patient with child's inconsistency than a parent? Because me growing up being dyslexic, being a right brain thinker as opposed to the left brain thinker, I was outside the mold, so I was constantly being beat into the mold by teachers. My children, one being one headed and the other being the other headed amongst my boys, being able to let them develop in their own way as opposed to be stuck into the mold that they had to fit has allowed them both the freedom to be happy in what they do. And there's a certain part of that we've lost as a society too, because we don't develop into what we want to do. We develop into a niche we think we can fit or fill. And
Yeah, and whose niche is that,
educationally,
right? Like
it,
we always think it's somebody else's niche.
education, right. Well, see, that's the thing. They're trying to dictate what niche we go into, as well as everything else. That's, I mean, during okay, the standardized testing, it's made so that they can direct a child to a particular field of study, so to speak. Um, that standardized testing is set up on a set of averages. If you got somebody whose whole learning system's outside of all those averages, you may direct him into a field you think he's going to be good at, but has really no application. But since he's not getting what you're trying to teach him, you're trying to beat him into that box. You develop a dislike for those very things, even though you're expecting him to go into that field. And now you've got a bunch of angry, upset workers who are very dissatisfied with their life because they're never going to fulfill what everybody's telling them they should be doing. And they're relying on their self worth from the system. So they're never going to be satisfied in that system. So, I mean, we're setting up a psychopathic society. They've been doing it for a century now. They've been gearing a
Yep.
psychopathic society,
I totally
and
agree
they
with you, man.
do it by making so many.
This is why I wanted to do this
You,
series
you
with you is because you noticed this probably a lot before many years before I noticed it. I've only been cognizant of the whole scope of the whole system for maybe a couple of years at the most. And you know what? Funnily enough, it took a catastrophe in my life to actually get me to realize it. But that's another side point. The point I wanted to make is uh, there really is uh, a disconnect between what education is now perceived to be and what education actually truly is. Like, um, I'll give you an example, and here's a really sort of oxymoronical example. Um, us in Canada, we have different views on guns, okay? And there's different provinces; they have different laws. Blah 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 blah. Long story short, my son, I would never be able to teach my son how to shoot a gun, but he sent me videos on him taking apart a gun, maintaining it, putting it back together, like all the safety precautions that you have to do, and it's I'll have to admit it's weird when your kid living in a country like Canada sends you a video of him shooting two handguns, one in each hand, but I've already seen the videos of him taking those guns apart and putting them back together, and so on one hand I'm like, well, fucking thank God he's on my side. And then on the other hand, I'm like, but I've never seen a child shoot a gun. But then my next line of thought is like, well, he would have never learned how to shoot a gun in school. Ever. There's no way in Canada you're going to go to
mhm.
school at grade school level, like grade 8, grade 9. You're not going to learn how to shoot a gun. Sorry, that's just not the way things work. So the only way you're going to learn how to shoot a gun at that age is if someone shows you. And that's, in my opinion, the same thing as homeschooling. So what's better? Like,
Right.
who am I to argue? I couldn't have taught my son that, but at the same time, okay, yeah, I understand. Okay, for one, in my opinion, guns, like, yeah, they're okay for self defense and hunting. Beyond that, some of the guns they make are clearly designed to just kill people, and those guns shouldn't be for sale, in my opinion. Uh, but knowing how to do all that, and I don't know how to do it, and I can see that my son knows how to do it. It's like, uh, you know, if he ever had to go off grid, at least I know he'd be able to know where to shoot a moose or where to shoot a deer or like what caliber he would need you're not going to kill a moose with a 22, right? I mean, like he's the one who taught me that. Like he's like, if you try to kill a moose with a 22, you're dead. like, I'm like, oh, okay. What if I had a bow and arrow? And
Yeah,
he's like, no.
you're very
He's
good
like,
at doing
and
that.
he's like, dude, if you have a bow and arrow, you should be running. like,
Yeah,
okay, and he like,
yeah.
I wouldn't have been like, school didn't teach him that. It was another person that taught him that. So, that to me is that's
And
a
those
form
are
of homeschooling.
skills that might become very necessary, right? And
Exactly.
those are skills that might very soon be necessary. And see, here's I've gone back and forth for years. See, going to college and coming out of having several friends die during the Gulf War storm and some things like that. I was pacifistic, raging through the hippie community. But then when I decided that, oh, wait a minute, this world's kind of going a little goofy, and I don't want my kids to have to go through all these same things that I'm going through, and maybe I should gear toward more of a pioneer type lifestyle. Well, when you do that, you begin to realize there's necessity to life and death. You you can take a hatchet to a chicken, but you can't take a hatchet to a goat or a deer. And it's a lot more work to chase a goat and deer into a chute to slit his throat than it is to drop him with a gun with a shot and then go out and clean him. I mean, there's just different aspects to it that the self defense part of it. I would hope that there would come a day that that was never necessary. In our fallen state, in our fallen system, it's going to be necessary, and maybe even to take up arms against some that may corrupt the system even further.
Well, yeah,
Um,
and you know what? That's
but
I mean, okay, so what do you have to say to people that are okay? So I guess we should maybe clarify something before we go any further about all these kind of things because, in my opinion, well, I've been uh, looking into like not necessarily prepping. Like I don't want to put that stigma on it, kind of thing, but you know, like considering the idea of like what would happen if I couldn't rely on certain utilities or certain things or blah blah blah. And so I started thinking about that stuff, and uh, so you're you're in a position now where you can get well, at least mostly off grid. Like you just take one piece, you look at it, and you're like, how can I take that off my grid? And boom, it gets done. And then you look at the next piece, and there's importance in prioritizing those pieces as well. And homeschooling kind of fits into that whole thing as well because like if you're looking long term, like how a lot of these people that are in control, they look way like the hundreds of years ahead, right? So like how do we combat that or offset that? Is we got to look the same kind of terms as they do, and so like what I want to ask is, i- okay, because you okay, you've got some resources that I mean, obviously, practically thinking, a lot of people aren't going to be able to get. And that's mostly in regards to like the land part and also the knowledge, the research that you've already done, the I guess you could say homeschooling
right.
that you've already given yourself. Um, if you
Mhm.
were to break it down into like three like top, like let's say you're just coming into the idea that what, even if this election and if this COVID or if this whatever doesn't bring down the actual proverbial shit that's supposed to hit the fan, what if it's something else? Solar flare, a meteorite, anything. Just the idea of thinking about utilities, and by utilities I mean running water, folks. Like you can't, you turn your tap on and nothing comes out. What are you gonna do? Um, give me your top three things that you
3 days in a
yeah,
row.
your top three things that you should square away while you still have time.